I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume. So I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. And we are still in 2 Corinthians. So far, this epistle seems to be largely an encouragement. He's comparing what was to what will be. What the Corinthian saints used to have in their pagan traditions or in the Jewish tradition, and how the gospel is so much better. How resurrected glory will be so much better than mortality. And so he's saying, stay faithful. Remain steadfast in the gospel, because what we have now is better than what we had in the past. And what we will have is better than what we have now. Seems to be the general message. So now we will continue in chapter 6. In this video, we have a Joseph Smith translation. Now what the Joseph Smith translation is, this is a translation or correction done by Joseph Smith to restore those passages that have been lost or corrupted over the years. 2 Corinthians chapter 6. We then, as workers together with him, beseech you also that ye receive not the grace of God in vain. For he saith, I have heard thee in a time accepted, and in the day of salvation have I succored thee. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Giving no offense in anything, that the ministry be not blamed, but in all things approving ourselves as the ministers of God, in much patience, in afflictions, in necessities, and distresses, in stripes, in imprisonments, in tumults, in labors, in watchings, in fastings, by pureness, by knowledge, by long-suffering, by kindness, by the Holy Ghost, by love unfeigned, by the word of truth, by the power of God, by the armor of righteousness on the right hand and on the left, by honor and dishonor, by evil report and good report, as deceivers and yet true, as unknown and yet well known, as dying and behold we live, as chastened and not killed, as sorrowful yet always rejoicing, as poor yet making many rich, as having nothing and yet possessing all things. O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open unto you, our heart is enlarged. Ye are not straitened in us, but ye are straitened in your own bowels. Now for a recompense in the same I speak as unto my children, be ye also enlarged. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God, as God hath said, I will dwell in them, and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. This seems to be just basically a admonition on how you are supposed to act, how you're supposed to be behaving yourself as members and as ministers. Now this says that the ministry be not blamed, giving no offense in anything. The ministry. Remember I mentioned in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians, in the Joseph Smith translation, it indicated that the advice he gave about marriage was because the Corinthians were going to be called to the ministry soon. And now we have Paul here in this epistle writing to them on how to conduct themselves while they are ministering. So now we know they have been called. They are ministering to the people in all the area around them. And so minister, regardless of what your afflictions are, regardless of what trials you go through, in afflictions and patience, distresses and imprisonments, doesn't matter what you suffer, stay faithful, minister. How do you minister? By truth, by power, by virtue, by honor. And whether it's in good report or bad report, doesn't matter, you stick faithful. And then I like the, as sorrowful yet always rejoicing, as poor yet making the contrasts. Even in these situations, act like the opposite is true, because it will be true eventually. In sorrows, rejoice in what you will have. If you are poor, you can rejoice in the wealth of the gospel that we are spreading. I like this whole contrast, but it is his teaching them how to go about ministry. Now, be not unequally yoked to an unbeliever. This is talking about marriage. Remember, in the first epistle, in chapter 7, he did give his advice that if you are married to an unbeliever and they're happy to stay with you, fine, stay with them. If they're not, get a divorce. And it's kind of going back to the same thing. If you're married and your spouse is not only an unbeliever but is actively going against the church, going against the gospel and the church, then you need to be separated from them. That is being unequally yoked. If a woman goes and ministers in the church and then goes home to a husband who is berating her for her faith, it's not a good thing. And the same thing, if a husband goes to minister and comes home and is belittled by his wife for his faith, that's a problem. Be not unequally yoked to an unbeliever. That's what it means, that if they're willing to support you in your faith, even if they don't believe, but if they're willing to live and support you in your faith, fine. If they are antagonistic to your faith, it is better to dissolve the marriage. Now, before we sign off, there is one brief Joseph Smith translation here. In the first verse, verse 1, where it opens up in the King James, says, "We then, as workers together with him." The correction is, "We then, workers together with Christ." It removes that "as," so it's no longer a simile or comparison. It's just, we are workers with Christ. And it clarifies who him is, but minor corrections. We leave that here, and we will pick it up in chapter 7 next, so I will see you there.